Welcome to Image Bearers. My name is Otoma Edje. I'm very excited to have on the program today Tom and Carol Nuelle, who are disciples leading the church in Wisconsin. They actually were here in Detroit, Michigan for about 4 years, and we're very sad to have them leave. But good thing is, they're just a Zoom call away. Also joining us today is Michael James, who's an awesome disciple here in Detroit. He definitely wants to learn more about the purity ministry. So he's joining the broadcast today to obviously get some connections with the Nuelles. So before we go ahead and dive in, I'm going to go ahead and read a bio in reference to our awesome guests, Tom and Carol. Again, this is Image Bearers. This is season 3, episode 29. This is our 4th installment of Image Bearers and Purity, which is a much needed topic for all of us to cover to make sure we're having victory in our lives and living the lives that God would have each one of us live. So I'm just going to go ahead and read a bio real quick and we'll dive in. So Tom Nuelle is one of the co-founders of Pure and Simple Ministry, which focuses on helping men and women break free from unwanted sexual behaviors and codependency. Tom started his first purity group in 2004, which has grown into several dozen groups, helping hundreds of men and women around the world, which is awesome. He also authored a book entitled Living Pure, a 42-day Bible study series, which contains the key lessons learned while working in the field of sexual purity. Tom recently launched Tom Nuelle Coaching, which I'm sure is going to be awesome, which is a coaching business specifically focused on helping people overcome unwanted sexual behaviors. Tom has worked in a full-time ministry since 1996. Some of you may not have been born then, but hey, it's a deal. In Chicago, in Detroit, like I said, for 4 years, and he currently leads the Madison Church of Christ. He is also a recovering alcoholic and has been sober for 34 years, which is flat awesome. Carol Nuelle started the first known women's purity group in our fellowship. She has been instrumental in helping women overcome both purity and codependency issues for 11 years. Carol has also done many purity/codependency workshops in cities around the world, from Chicago to Johannesburg and Cape Town, to San Antonio and to New York. Carol has worked in the full-time ministry for 20 years also, and has an amazing impact around the world, and it continues even to this day, which is awesome. So again, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thanks, Otoma.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Oh man. And Tom, I won't be singing today. I'm going to spare everyone from that. And again, thank you, Michael James, for joining the program and assisting as a co-host.
Thank you, Otoma.
So why don't you go ahead and take it away with the first question for the Nuelles.
Well, my name is Michael, and I just want to ask you guys a couple of questions. Can you please share with me a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to start a purity ministry?
Yeah. Addictions has been a part of my life, like Otoma mentioned. 34 years ago, I quit drinking, and I went to AA, and I was part of addiction recovery. Then I became part of our church. I became a disciple. And in 2004, a friend of mine, in fact, the brother who studied the Bible with me and helped me become a Christian, Dave Widener, talked to me about starting a purity group. And honestly, my addiction background combined with, I just wanted to hang out with my friend Dave once a week. Plus I had struggles. I just I wasn't super aware of them. But then I said, oh yeah, okay, let's go ahead and start a group. And I was Dave, myself, and 2 other guys. And it was amazing how just guy after guy after guy started coming to our group. Then on top of that, as we were doing the programs that we were reading in workbooks, we began to really learn the things necessary to be able to break free of sexual sin in our lives. And so we started having like tremendous success, and then other guys started having success. And we just concluded that God must be doing something through us through this ministry.
Amen. And for me, it began in Chicago with, I think I first began a group, or I did begin a group with the wives of the guys who were in the purity ministry. We're like a support group for the wives. And we learned a lot. We grew a lot. And Then I began codependency groups. And then there was a lot of women in the Chicago church who felt like we need a purity group, not just the guys, it's a women's issue too. So I began a purity group in Chicago. And then we moved to the Detroit church. I had a group there as well. And even here in Madison, I began a women's purity group, that there was a need everywhere, really, I went.
Wow. That is so enlightening to hear. How bad would you say sexual addiction is right now?
Terrible doesn't do it justice. It's everywhere. It really is. I would say, there are a lot more people addicted to sexual sin than people who have gotten COVID. So like you're trying to think of a pandemic, something that's just absolutely everywhere. Sexual addiction, not only in our country, but in our world, and especially with the advent of the internet. In 2018, there were 28, just for one website, Pornhub, there were 28 billion visits to that one website. That's enough for 4 visits for every man, woman, and child on the face of the earth. And then the following year, it went from 28 billion to 32 billion. So not only does that seem like such a fantastic number, but then it even grew the following year in 2019. But this idea of addiction is everywhere. And I would define addiction as just the inability, let's say you say to yourself, I don't want to do this anymore, but the inability to carry out with what you say you want to do. So I want to stop. Well, a week later, you're looking again. I want to stop a month later, or another day, an hour later. Like there's just you want it out of your life, but you cannot get it out. And that's what an addict is. And our world is filled with people right now who are like this.
So from my understanding and just experience that I've had, pornography has a huge impact on the brain. And can you share how does pornography, how it affects the wiring of the brain? For
sure. Whenever we experience something pleasurable, let's say even it's a good meal, right? There's a little party. Our brain has all these synapses. They all come together and wire in a certain way. And it creates this alarm system that says, hey, something really good has happened. That's why our favorite meals, we want to go back to our favorite meals because something really hit us in the pleasure center in our brain. Sexual sin is the same way. It creates, once you experience it, it creates a pleasure experience where your brain will always then have an impulse to want to go back to it. Even if it causes you harm, even if there's negative things associated with it. Now, once that happens, then there becomes the neurochemistry anticipation of the looking at pornography or the acting out sexually in some form or fashion. So the anticipation starts to create endorphins, and it starts to release neurochemicals inside of us that are exciting. And then once that happens, it starts working, and then we begin to pursue what it is that we want. Ultimately, when we act out or have some kind of sexual experience, then a great deal of dopamine is released in our brain. But this entire experience gets wired into us in a way where we just continue over and over to have an impulse to go back to it. The only resistance to it is your prefrontal cortex, which has the ability to process the consequences of your choices. The problem is it acts a lot slower than the part of your brain that creates this experience pleasure place in your brain. So in order to deal with sexual sin or an addiction of some type, you have to really work and rewire the prefrontal cortex to be prepared for when those temptations and impulses are going to come your way.
Yeah, it's as if our brain has paths or tracks in them. Yeah. So we get addicted, we keep going back to the same place. But the good news is you can rewire this with the power of God and help. We can lay new tracks, with a lot of different tools that we have found and that we've been able to use in our ministries.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Sounds like you can put a whole presentation together of the effect that it has. That's
Yeah.
We've done a lot of talking about neurochemistry and sexual addiction and that kind of thing. Yep.
Yeah.
Right. So some may not be aware, but this is a struggle now that men and women both face.
Yep.
Could you guys share the differences, or if there are any differences that men and women share with this addiction?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of it is the same, and then there's maybe some differences. And I guess this is generally speaking, because everyone's going to have their own issue with addiction and with pornography. But I think just like men, if women are exposed at an early age to pornography or sexual abuse, that really opens the door and puts them on a path that maybe, they shouldn't go down, and that has been, those boundaries were lifted way too soon. So definitely that can be the same. I think the shame piece might be more for women, perhaps. Women think they're the only women struggling perhaps with it, not realizing that there are other girls, there are other women who do struggle with this. And so I think there's a shame component, and that they're too embarrassed and too ashamed to get help. I think also another aspect for women perhaps is the romance fantasy. I think girls were taught at a very young age, Disney stories, Disney Channel, TV, movies, and even books and romance novels, that it's all about finding that man to complete us, getting the boy to kiss us. I think we can create a fantasy world with all that we read and see and are bombarded with. So that too plays into trying to get that romance fantasy world going. And that's a hard thing to come back from. It's hard to live in reality sometimes. So we create this fantasy world, and along with that can be pornography.
Yeah. I would just add, to that for men. We've all even heard the term one-track mind, right? That guy's got a one-track mind. There's a little bit, that's kind of the way God made men, is to get locked onto things, right? To get focused and to, kind of tune out distractions. So when men get addicted, right, it's kind of their nature to get locked in on something. And unless they really know themselves and know how to break out of that, it's real easy to get started, and then it's real easy to get locked in, and you're addicted before you even know you're addicted.
Thanks for that. That again too is a long bio.
There's a lot to be said for this issue, for sure.
Probably can stretch this for 2 hours.
Yeah.
So Romans 7, there's like a lot of justification for sin. Could you guys share your conviction with Romans 7?
Okay. If I were to summarize Romans 7, where there is confusion, it's a popular term today in the religious world. Hey, we're under grace. We're not under the law. If you sin a little bit, God's got you covered. And so sometimes what people do is they use that as a rationalization for not taking their sin too seriously, because God's going to forgive it. I think in order to really even answer that question, or to understand that, or like if you're at that place, you have a theology problem. Like there's a fundamental understanding of what the Bible says about sin and how it affects your relationship with God. And even Jesus forgiving us of our sin is just one need. The other need is power to overcome our sin. And what I mean by that is, at the core of a human-God relationship, what destroys it is sin. Sin takes it out, and it creates hardness in our heart towards God. Like there's several negative consequences in our life as a result of the sin. If I'm sinning in this way and I say, oh, God's got this thing, God's got it covered, you're actually experiencing the consequences, and you're unaware that you're suffering the consequences. Once you become aware, oh, wow, my heart's hard towards God. I'm not like in open fellowship with other people because of the shame this sin has created. I'm not living powerfully influencing other people because I've dealt with the sin in my life. When you start recognizing, oh, that's where you really are, you become enlightened to the reality of that argument doesn't really, that argument is a non-biblical argument. It's a misunderstanding of the things that God is saying in the Bible. That's a deep question.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome, Michael.
So we have Otoma here that's going to come in and take over.
Great.
Thanks so much, Michael. Much appreciate your help. So it seems obvious to, think that, vulnerability and openness need to be something that is part of the repertoire of, overcoming sexual sin. But can you break that down a little bit?
Sure. And I think when you mean open, you mean revealing to another person what you've been a part of, what you're thinking, where you're really at in the area of sexuality and sexual sin. Mm-hmm. And so when you say openness, but the part of the process overcoming is being able to reveal to other people what's going on. This particular sin, it's unique. It just creates a great deal of shame. I can be arrogant, and then it just doesn't even bother me. I don't feel bad about it. I mean, later on, somebody might mention it to me, and I'm like, oh yeah, I shouldn't have been that way. But if I'm somehow in some kind of sexual sin, I just immediately want to cover up. And I'm not the only one. Anybody who does, they want to cover up. They're like, ooh, we don't want to talk about it. It immediately cuts me off from other people. And especially if I'm married, it immediately cuts me off from my wife, where I start building a secret life that I don't want to talk about. And we see it in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve. As soon as they sinned against God, the first thing they did is they covered themselves up. It's the shame component. And with this particular same sin, shame is very high. And the solution, when we are in shame, we suffer other consequences, not only separation from God, but it literally affects our ability to think. If I'm not open with other people and I'm hiding things, I can't think clearly. My creativity is stifled. There's all kinds of just effects of being a person who hides from other people. So the Bible says, live in the light, and the first promise is going to be fellowship with other people. And then the blood of Jesus is going to cover over a multitude of my sin. But when I'm open, when I finally, that wall of shame, I decide, you know what? I don't care. It could go bad. Somebody could add more shame to my shame, but I'm going to break through the wall of shame. I'm going to reveal where I'm really at. Almost immediately, one feels the love of God return to it's just like energy to their soul and energy to who they are. And so a big part of recovery, like you mentioned in your question, is this ability to break through that wall of shame and then develop a lifestyle of no more hiding. So that you just want to have a lifestyle where, you know what, I've got at least a few people in my life where if something's going on, I can put it out there, and I'm not trapped alone again.
And I think Satan wants to keep us in the dark, as Satan's in the dark, right? God's in the light. So Satan, that's the spiritual battle. Satan wants us to stay shamed, stay closed. And when I ask sisters, like, oh, when someone's open to you, how do you feel when someone confesses sin to you? And we all can relate to say, we feel closer to the person, we have compassion for the person. So it's really a win-win thing when we actually are open and vulnerable about our weaknesses and our sin. But Satan wants us to think that's the wrong path to take. So it's definitely, that's the power we have of being open and vulnerable, that God can definitely use that.
Yeah, Satan wants that lie, no one can relate to you. You're alone.
Yeah.
Don't say anything. So no, thank you. So I think in a recent class that you gave, I think it was in for the Greater Houston Church, I believe, you mentioned the importance of, I think that definitely makes sense, but can you break that down a little bit? What would that look like, a training mindset?
Yeah. I think we can relate to it. We all have there's difficult battles that all of us aim for, especially in the area of self-control, right? For a diet, or let's say we want to lose a few pounds. A training mindset is you're thinking long-term. We're not trying to fix this in a week or a day. And especially when it comes to purity. And if you've been in our church for a long period of time, you can remember days when the only model for repentance was 2 Corinthians 7, 8 through 11. And people, it's godly sorrow. If you confessed a sin, maybe another brother would kind of speak to you firmly, and he'd say, brother, you need to get some godly sorrow about that and get serious. And then if you had kind of an emotional response to it, he would say, yep, that's a guy. Yep, you're crying. That's good. And
so like instant change.
Instant change. Exactly.
Was expected. Yeah.
But a training mindset is more, it's a long-term approach. Hey, I'm gonna daily, I'm gonna make some efforts, and I'm gonna try to do it consistently. I'm gonna learn a lot. I'm gonna become a student of the thing that I'm battling with. And then even the little victories feed to the motivation for the big victories. So many guys I've worked with over the years, they don't just come to the group and stop. They actually slow their acting out as they're learning and they're getting open. And then oftentimes one day they just stop acting out, right? They've changed their life. They've changed how they relate to God. They've changed their habits. And then all of it, they just slowly but surely get a resolve to be like, yeah, I don't need that anymore. I've got a life that's of value, and I don't need that to try. That they're no longer in that place of overwhelmed and desperate and feel like a failure. They're starting to feel that power of consistent walking with God.
Yeah, and a phrase we like to use a lot is consistency over intensity.
Yes, I remember you saying that.
Yes, so key to this training mindset. That's that one day at a time mindset. It's not just, the rest of my life. Yeah. No, just for today, God, help me be pure. I noticed in one of my groups too, the women were not having quiet times. So they weren't even going to the good food source. They weren't getting their food for their daily bread, right? So once I really started talking about their daily quiet times, then they were doing better in their purity as well. Again, it's that consistency, going to God every day, and then really focusing on having a day of great purity.
I think what you're saying is that you're helping them to build their integrity in terms of trusting themselves. If they make a commitment to be pure, then through the accountability, through the group that they're part of, the safe space that they're involved in, they start like trusting themselves. The shame starts going away because they're having victory. It's almost like a upward spiral in as many areas are addressed at the same time, including being in the light and no longer being in the dark.
Yeah, that's super insightful. That's a really insightful question. There's a guy I've been working with here recently, and initially he was like, "Oh, I've got to do the coaching because I keep failing."
It's Tom Nuelle Coaching, man. Come on, buddy. It's gonna be good, man.
And then. But he recently in one of our appointments is like, man, I get to do the coaching.
Yeah.
Like he's like, my life is worth being victorious.
That's
and
awesome.
It's a shift. It's not, I'm not responsible for anybody's purity. God's not even responsible, right? God just holds us, it's not about somebody else holding you accountable. It's about you solving a spiritual problem. In Romans chapter 1, the Bible says, essentially men and women are without excuse. We fail to honor God. We fail to give thanks. There's a functional breakdown in our spirituality when we're addicted to something. And that is what we seek to repair and strengthen and get in the right track so that ultimately you get in this place with God because of the attention and the effort and the focus that you begin to have the power that comes from God to be able to overcome the sin that tempts us.
And that too, when we're in a group and someone confesses their sin, we don't need to shame them. They know they're in sin. So it's like, it is giving them the victory to say, okay, I'm going to be open. That is the victory. Just sometimes coming and, coming to a group, that is the victory. And then, yes, they absolutely see themselves growing, and they get so fired up that they had a quiet time every day, and that they started seeing themselves act out less and less. And it is a great thing to see and be a part of. But yeah,
no, Carol, you bring up a great point about the shame. Like sometimes people treat this particular problem by adding more shame to people.
Yeah.
And that's just a poor.
That's a good point.
That's a poor choice of treatment. The shame's already there. God built shame into us. And especially somebody who's already decided to be a Christian, they know it's wrong. They know there's shame there. They need help learning to overcome shame.
Right.
Not only about the sin they get involved in, but almost every time people have other things about their lives that they feel ashamed of that they don't want to talk about with other people. So it's all part of the same thing. It's hiding. They just hide what really goes on in their lives.
Yeah.
It sounds like, just not to minimize it, but it sounds like a deeper level of discipleship, almost like discipleship is checkers, not to minimize discipleship, but this is more like chess in the sense of really, going after it. And again, I'm not trying to minimize, I'm just trying to make a little comparison. No. But I know you definitely have had, victories through your ministry, obviously. You shared about some of the elements. Can you maybe share about a little bit more, if you can maybe just kind of shape that a little bit more as far as some of the elements that are as part of your purity ministry and some of the victories that you've seen in individuals that have followed the principles that you've taught?
If I understand you correctly, do you want me to just share some victory stories that people have had?
Yeah, just generally, without naming names, this kind of thing. And also some of the principles that you have. I know accountability, obviously, being in group and being open, but are there any other principles that are part of the group that you guys have and that you teach?
Okay. I'm gonna go with the second one first, just different victory stories.
Sure.
I could think of guys. Carol confronted this brother's wife, who was not confronting her husband's sexual sin.
Got it.
Really being passive. And so Carol said, "Hey, you need to go home and tell him, hey, I'm not putting up with this." And it was more than just even pornography. It was like on the lines of infidelity. And then he called, and the fruit of that was he ended up calling me. And then I would ask him questions. Are you committed to doing the work? Are you committed to coming to the meetings? And this is not going to be a quick fix, but the fruit of that is not only did he repent, their marriage really turned around, and then they became like purity warriors. It created a role for them within our fellowship that they would have never even known was there. Since that time, they've lived in different cities around the country. Everywhere they go, they start talking to the ministers, they start groups, and they're just amazing. I mean, it's an incredible victory story. I could think of another guy who was a single guy in the ministry who was on the verge of getting fired for acting out and being impure in relationships and stuff, who now is married. He's got a couple kids. He's an evangelist. He's been profoundly successful in the ministry. And like that's those kinds of stories. I mean, where people, like the Bible says, like your shame is turned into glory, right? It's transformed, the victory, and God gets the credit for that. It's not Carol and I, right? We're just vessels. God's the one who he sees that potential in all of us. All of us have this amazing potential to do great things, but so often our spiritual life is impaired in some way. Actually, in retrospect, I've come to the belief that God uses this sexual addiction thing as a way to help people become serious about their spirituality to the level that he wants. Like I was under ambition.
I agree.
I was under ambition. I just didn't want to become the kind of Christian that God wanted me to become until I found myself with this thing I can't get rid of. And okay, you want me dedicated? I'm dedicated. You want every day? I'll do every day. You tell me to read a book? I'll read that book. You tell me to jump? I'll jump. like that spirit of just willing to go to any lengths, like and poured towards specifically God, all of a sudden bears amazing fruit and life transformation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the women too, just getting the victory of being set free from daily pornography use. That
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. And I know one back to consistency over intensity is Tom's book. Tom's book is great for women and men, obviously, but it's called Living Pure, and it's 40 days. And it's that consistency every day. Do something about it. And so to see the victory stories that just come from that book is amazing. And how women use that, have a quiet time, and that's just part of it. Gets them focused for the day. And to have a victory at the end of the day where they didn't think that was possible, to me, that's also victory stories too. And these are the heroes to me in the church that people are not going to know about, right? They're, some do go on to be in the ministry or house church leaders. We see the Bible Talk leaders, but then there's just some that just they feel better about themselves. They don't leave the church in shame, but they stay realizing, wow, I overcame some things and now I want to help others. So those are other victory stories, how they now are leading groups also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure if you can think back to 2011 when you started the Women's Purity Ministry in our family of churches, and just what some of the impact was to go from, again, not having a ministry, not having anyone to talk to, living in the dark, to just getting those, experiencing those victories. I mean, I know there's been victories obviously since then as the ministry has progressed, but can you think back to the beginning and that were like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I didn't even want to lead it. I was like, oh, can someone else lead this?
Yeah.
What was interesting too, now we lived in the city of Chicago, and we had girls in the city and suburbs, and we met at 7 a.m. Saturday morning.
Okay.
That's how committed these gals were, because you wait any longer, your travel time is just going to increase. We were right off the expressway. We're pretty central, but it was just, they're tired of the enslavement to this.
Sure.
And these were the girls. So I started realizing we're not having quiet times. Okay, let's just break it down and get back to feeling worthy of opening our Bible every day and praying every day. So it was, but these ladies were so committed, and I could literally see them blossom like a flower, starting kind of just defeated, and just see the victories of, this happened, but I didn't act out. I was tempted to, look at pornography, but I didn't. And that we celebrated, because that's what we needed, those victories. And so, it was great in the beginning, starting that out. And then, so.
Have you noticed that some of the strongest disciples come out of the purity ministry? Not that they would necessarily become like evangelist, leader, this or whatever, but like I think Tom said, I mean, once they realize, like, man, I've been able to overcome this, and there's so much shame. Have you noticed that these are just some very fired up disciples? He who has been forgiven much loves much, kind of a concept.
Well, I would love to share, like, what happens when these guys start overcoming is all of a sudden in your ministry, like in some ministry somewhere, a 40-year-old guy is coming to church all fired up.
Yep.
And so their evangelist is like, oh, what happened? They're like, you want to lead a church? You want to lead a group? All of a sudden, somebody starts putting them to work or whatever. That's because right. They're getting there. Like, part of it is overcoming, but it's just God. Like, there's so much power around God. And when you start drawing close to that power, it just like transforms you. You can't help but get excited, and can't help be motivated, and hey, give me the next thing to do. And anyway, a lot of that has happened over the years, where you're staffing other ministries with their leaders, and they don't realize they may not even realize it's because their guys are overcoming purity.
And our Pure and Simple conference is my absolute favorite conference I've ever been to. And we didn't get to have it because of COVID, but that crew of people, because we're in the trenches together, and you come to that conference, and maybe the first time you come, it's like, oh gosh, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm shameful. I'm feeling shame coming in. but you leave walking out with lifelong friends and realizing that we're in the trenches, and it's just a great group of disciples. So that's what, and it's a blessing to know people all over the kingdom through this. So yeah, it's a great group of disciples, that's for sure.
So it seems like you've had a lot of victory in sexual purity. Have you branched out into any other aspects, whether it's anger, food addictions, or is it primarily focused on sexual purity?
Well, I know for me, I've had mixed bags for sure before. Like
Okay.
a group would be, I've got all sorts of addictions in there: the food, the shopping, pornography. Codependency is an addiction to people in a sense. So yeah, I've definitely had those groups, and it's been the same tools are helpful. But if I had more resources, I'd rather just have the groups be very similarly focused.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've met, of course, just being in the ministry, you uncover a lot of addictions inside of people's lives. And the principles are helpful. But when you're creating a group, the camaraderie around the same problem adds an extra measure of solution power.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand, like, there's groups like Celebrate Recovery where any kind of addiction comes, and then you break up into different types of groups. And I personally prefer the camaraderie around the same way. It's like you're all in the military together. Or you're all in this. It's like, hey, we're in this thing.
Yeah.
I was going to add just one more thing. I'll try not to be too long-winded here. You said, are there any principles, like discipleship principles?
Yes.
One of the ways you can even tell, you learn to spot who's going to get better and who's not going to get better with pretty proficient accuracy. It's the person who's willing to allow somebody else to give them a plan of discipleship for their lives. Mm-hmm. Meaning, if the person could have already figured out how to overcome their situation and their circumstance, they would have done it before they came to the meeting. Right. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's a great part. Like, nobody ever comes because they want to hang out with us. They only come.
No.
Get out of. You know what I'm saying? They only come because they want to overcome this thing.
Yeah.
For sure.
So then you say, okay, hey, here's what you need to do. This is the plan. Let's lay out a plan for you to get you started. If they're unwilling to surrender and submit to that plan, they won't change, because there's an issue of pride where they're not surrendering. It's not about surrendering to the leadership. It's about surrendering to God.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very important principle that we hold dearly to. Like, hey, listen, we are disciplable in that way. We're correctable. We're trainable. We want to be
deep.
Guys.
That's deep. This is like Miyagi.
Yeah. Yeah. And we tell, this is a group, we are going to become better Christians. That's what it's about. It's about being a better disciple is what this is for. And that's what happens.
That's awesome. So I know that sexual purity, or should I say impurity, is affecting children at younger and younger ages. Can you maybe share about some ways to talk to kids so they don't get scared off and, have a wall up and never talk to you again, so to speak, never talk to their parents? Second part of that question is, are there any resources that you can recommend for parents?
Okay. That's a really challenging question.
It's like a long answer.
It's a long answer.
Long answer.
It's more of a thinking answer, because everybody's kids are different. There's not really a formula of 3 things to do. Have devos on purity in 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade, and then they won't look at porn in 5th and 6th grade. It's just trying to help them. It's a combination of trying to help them create healthy ideas about sex, right? Mature idea, like, hey, sex is a great thing, but God designed it for marriage. It's designed to create unity between husband and wife, and it's amazing. If you get involved in this stuff, once you start going there, you won't be able to close the door again. So even like trying to help kids when they're young, maybe they don't, and you know how it is talking to kids. It's not like we're talking now, or you're nodding and you're listening. Sometimes when you talk to your children, you're talking to them and they're like distracted. It's just, oh, I'm sorry, here I'm getting, but I get excited. It's the ministering, banging the table. But you just try to communicate that to them often. Like, hey, listen, try it. Don't open that door. And then you also say, if something happens, we really want to be a place where you can talk about it, that you can be open about it. There's a lot of shame, and that you can feel like, hey, we're a place where you can talk about that. Now that's easy to talk about now. It's just hard to create that kind of environment in your relationship with your children, because especially as they're growing up, you're the authority figure. And in today's world, there are no authority figures. So you have to be a good authority figure within your own home, just so they have some authority and guidance.
And I think to add to that, while communicating with our kids, we need to not overreact.
Yeah.
I like this boy in school. It's like, what? He doesn't go to church? We cannot overreact, or we will shut that door and they'll never come back, right? So This is the little stuff. So we want to be in conversations with the little stuff. We're not shutting down, we're not controlling. So the big stuff, they know where to come to as well. I know when I do purity talks and I see like the young girls are in the front, I'm like, yes, that's who needs to hear the purity talks, right? So they set off on the right path. They do it God's way. So sometimes we feel like, at our conferences, our very first conference, we were like, how do we get this to the younger folks? Because we don't want, here we're older. It's like now we got to undo stuff versus how can we make sure that they're set as best as we can, set them up for success. So yeah, I think it's really important that they have conversations, or there's books going on like within our ministries or our families where there's a lot of books on purity for younger girls. I know for sure, I'm sure men as well, that we can be talking about and get dialogue going.
Yeah.
In a positive way.
And one thing, just to, even if I could speak to your listeners who are parents, listen, God can, there's hope, right? There's it's difficult, it's miserable. You don't want your kids to go there. And if they do, you want them to go as limited as possible. But we've just seen God. I think God's using it to bring people to him, because you can get better. You can go from somebody who's got this issue to becoming just be victorious in a powerful way. And that's just so important. Sometimes I've had talks with people who are like, they lament like the world's ended because their kid has got this problem or an addiction or something like that. The world has not ended. The Bible is still true. Everything necessary for us to live a godly life is given to us through our knowledge of Jesus. So anyway, little sermon there.
Awesome. So if someone's listening to this and they're saying, you know what, right on, man, I really want to make some changes in my life or really help my kids who are going through these challenges, what would be the first step you would recommend that they do? And I guess that's maybe a two-part question.
I would say the first step is to call somebody. Like if you really want, you say, gosh, if I need to change, you would want to call somebody. I'm always available, Tom Nuelle Coaching, in your church. There are so many more purity groups now than there were 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. We find them all the time. It's got, right? It was God's solution, and God's just spreading it out around his church. And people know so much more about this issue than they did 15 years ago.
And people come to our conference sometimes so they can learn and be trained and go back to their church and start a group. So really, there are a lot of purity groups. And sometimes, again, they're underground in a way. It's not always announced, but they're there. Sure. Yeah, because this is confidential who's in the group. So yeah.
But it's a vision principle. If you want a vision to come true, you have to share it with other people. Even if it's something as like unpleasant as you're trying to overcome something. Say people who lose weight usually have to tell other people, I'm trying to lose weight. I'm trying to lose weight. And then it makes it real for them. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, even those people start wanting to help you. So you got to be open with somebody. Again, I'm available. Your minister's available. There may be people in your church, wherever you're at, that are available. Let's say you want to start doing this with your children. I would say just little bit by little bit, start having the conversations. It's not this kind of thing is a lot of conversations over time transform your life. Conversations, and then if they need help with their parenting and they would want to talk, they could call me at Tom Nuelle Coaching again, or even outside of that, they could email us and we could give them some tips on just what to do to even start, because it starts with the parent changing themselves. That what is it they are doing that was keeping that line of communication down, or what are the problems? What's going on, and how can you brainstorm to be able to get the communication happening between parents and children?
That's awesome. So I know there's a conference coming up later on this year, I think November or so. Can you share a little bit about that so people can also get involved with that?
Okay. It's going to be our Pure and Simple conference, and it'll be in Boston this year. You will be able to sign up for it at pureandsimpleministry.org. Usually registration opens beginning of September. To come it's really quite an experience, like Carol said. There will be between 300 and 400 people there typically. And you're going to it's a conference. So you're going to get some speakers, and you're going to we even do this thing for everybody where everybody does art therapy together. So when we when we sit in ballrooms, we have round tables so that you end up being in a group throughout the time that you're in the conference. There's tracks for singles, there's tracks for women, there's tracks for marrieds, there's tracks for codependency, there's tracks for people who lead groups or want to lead groups.
And Guy Hammond's ministry's there. Guy's always there.
Guy Hammond.
Same-sex attraction.
Yeah, we were part of the original Three Musketeers there. It was Dave Widener, myself, and Guy Hammond, before Guy Hammond became Strength and Weakness. He just showed up and started talking about his thing, and then about unwanted same-sex attraction. And then we were like, hey, I guess we're all teammates. So, but the vulnerability will strike you. Right, you'll just hear a level of vulnerability that's unique, and perhaps I think the best part of it, which is never recorded, is the testimonies on Saturday night. We find testimonies from around the country, and they're almost always the same kind of story, just different circumstances, but people who overcame through the power of God, and they stand up, share in front of a few hundred people how God changed them. So you learn all this stuff about how it's supposed to work. And then on Saturday night, you see these people where it's actually taken place. And then Sunday morning, we all worship together as a church, and we're done for the weekend. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, your ministry, wow. I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing. And I'm glad you also were able to get to, other countries, as in, to South Africa. This is all over the world. It's a huge, huge problem. So I know this is a very serious subject. I wanted to end on a lighter note to get a chance to get to know you guys a little bit, and also, perhaps to breathe a little bit of air into this conversation, and, I guess make light in terms of bring some light into a very, dark, challenging situation. So what we have is a lightning round. And I'm actually going to include Mike James in this too, since it looks like I think we're doing okay for time. So I have basically 9 questions or points in reference to the lightning round. And I'll just have the Nuelles share first, and then Mike James. All right. So the first one is your favorite cuisine.
Vegetarian.
Barbecue.
Mike James?
I would say macaroni and cheese.
Okay.
I didn't even know it was a
I'm
cuisine.
a fan. I'm a fan.
I love mac and cheese.
Okay. Favorite film series?
All musicals, and maybe Devil Wears Prada.
Yesterday.
And I would say all the Rocky movies.
Okay. Mike?
Definitely, I would say the Rocky series. But one of my favorites is the Mummy series.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, if you guys are familiar with that.
Yes. So you guys don't have Disney? You don't see Marvel?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
do.
we love Disney musicals.
Okay. There's also a good one, Sarafina. That's a South African one.
Ooh,
Oh,
nice.
okay.
I love The Lion King.
Okay.
That's my ultimate favorite.
Favorite book of the Bible, at least right now?
Daniel.
Psalms.
Matthew.
Okay. Matthew? Okay, good deal, good deal. Favorite place to live?
Ann Arbor and Madison, Wisconsin.
Okay, okay.
Wherever I'm living.
There you go.
Oh, good man right there. Sounds like the marriage vows. Wherever you go, I'll go.
There you go.
Michael James?
I gotta say, I gotta go with what Tom said. Typically, wherever I go, I meet someone, and there's just always some type of connection.
Got it. I can believe that. You're a great guy. All right. Paper Bible or digital Bible?
Paper.
Digital.
Man, I'll have to go with both.
Okay. Okay. You've been decisive on the other, so I'll take that as not an indecisive decision. Apple or Android?
I just came over to the Apple family, literally like January. So I love Android, but now I'm an Apple with the rest of the family.
Apple.
Okay. So you converted her, Tom, or the kids?
No. It was actually, I had a Galaxy phone, but I like Apple products because, and especially because they don't get viruses. And like you're not, like I somehow with Microsoft stuff, I was always, I would get these viruses and it would take 2 days to get the computer cleaned off. And so I just like Apple products in general. And then we got free phones with US Cellular, free iPhones, iPhone 12
That's what did it.
for the
That's
whole
what I converted.
for the whole family. So we got 4 new free iPhone 12s.
Okay, stop advertising for them.
I'm a fan of US Cellular now too.
Yeah, my work upgraded my phone. I thought I was going to go from a 7 to an 8 or 6 to a 7 or whatever. They gave me an 11. I was like, I'll take that.
Yeah.
All right, next one, cake or pie?
Cake.
Pie.
Okay.
Cake.
Okay. Okay. Indoors or outdoors?
Outdoors.
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 Okay. And last one, oceans or mountains?
Mountains.
Mountains.
Oceans.
Okay. We're not talking the movie, but that's fine. All right. Well, again, thanks so much for your time. Again, we wanted to end on a light note. It's definitely a very heavy subject,
Sure.
A very important subject. And your ministry is such an important one. I do hope that many listening will take to heart what you shared. I will put in the show notes your contact, the website, pure and simple information. And I think you said the conference details are also on the website. So I'll have that included. And then, let's definitely strive, again, for those watching, to make sure that we're just living pure lives. There is a chance that we can all have victory. We just need to go according to the principles that have been laid out in scriptures and that people have, put into practice and have, created coaching ministries and so forth.
Amen. And thank you, Otoma. You are such a pillar of faith in our movement of our churches. So thank you so much for using all your talents to really be a light in our kingdom. So you're awesome, Otoma.
This is a true story. I'm not fluffing you up because you're interviewing us. Carol is always like, what we need is not money. We need the older Christians to move to the smaller churches to help build up the churches. Guys like Otoma.
That's Otoma.
She always says, like,
you
are the example. She's like, guys like Otoma.
Yes.
He's faithful. He's always serving the church. He's been around through the good, the bad, and the ugly. And he's just a great asset, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, and I'm not just saying that. It's just, that's true. She's always like, guys like Otoma. You're the standard in Carol's mind. For what
man, I appreciate that. I do think that, what you guys have done is just amazing. And I think your time in Detroit is just an upward call. I'm glad that we're able to have Michael James on the program so he can help you guys. Yeah. And we'll definitely, kind of go from there. So thanks again, everyone, for your time. Those that enjoyed the episode, please click like and consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks again.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.